Hey everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring a really fascinating world, the world of cybersecurity, but not the kind you might be used to. We're not talking about protecting your laptop or your phone this time. We're talking about the systems that run our power grids, our water systems, our manufacturing plants, all the stuff that keeps our world running smoothly. The stuff we don't really think about that much, the things that would cause serious disruption if they went wrong.
Yeah, that's right. These systems are absolutely essential, and they're often overlooked.
We're diving deep today into NIST.SP.800 to C82R3.PDF. It's a pretty lengthy guide. From the National Institute of Standards and Technology, all about securing these operational technology systems, or OT systems as they're called. This thing was just published in September 2023, so it's very up to date, and it's full of insights. Our mission today, to help you understand how OT cybersecurity works and why it matters, even if you're not a tech expert.
Exactly. We'll be pulling out the key takeaways so you can walk away with some aha moments.
All right, so first things first, what exactly is operational technology and how is it different from the IT world we're all familiar with? I mean, this isn't about passwords and firewalls for our laptops, right?
Right. It's a whole different ballgame. OT is all about the systems that control physical processes. Think about the systems that keep the lights on, the factories humming, the water flowing. While IT focuses on protecting data, OT prioritizes safety and real-time control above all else.
That makes sense. I was reading in the NIST document that simply rebooting a system, which is, a common troubleshooting step in IT, could actually be disastrous in an OT environment.
Yeah, absolutely. In IT, a brief interruption might be a minor inconvenience, but in OT, it could mean halting a production line or shutting down a power grid. The document mentions a couple incidents where well-intentioned IT security practices actually caused problems in OT environments. Like one time a security patch triggered a fire at NASA, and in another, a routine software update caused an outage at a nuclear power plant.
Wow, that really highlights the difference. It's easy to take for granted that things like traffic lights and water treatment plants will just work, but a simple mistake could have a ripple effect on everyday life.
Yeah, you're right. The consequences of OT failures can be significant. We're talking safety risk, environmental damage, economic disruption. The NIST document mentions the Maruki-Shire sewage spill in Australia. A disgruntled former employee used a radio transmitter to hack into the sewage system. It caused thousands of gallons of raw sewage to spill into the environment.
Oh, wow. That's scary. Sounds like the threats to OT can come from all directions. The NIST document talks about adversarial threats like hackers, accidental threats like human error, structural threats like outdated equipment, and even environmental threats like natural disasters.
You got it. It's a lot to consider.
So how do we even begin to protect these systems?
Well, the NIST document encourages us to think about security in layers, almost like building a castle with multiple walls and defenses. They call it defense in depth.
Okay, I like that analogy. So it's not just about having one strong lock on the door. It's about having multiple layers of protection in case one fails. So what are some of the layers in this defense in depth approach?
Well, NIST outlines 5 key layers: security management, physical security, network security, hardware security, and software security. Each layer plays a crucial role in protecting OT systems from different types of threats.
Out of all of those, which one stands out to you as the most important? Or maybe the most surprising when it comes to OT?
That's a great question. All layers are important, of course. But I'd say network segmentation is often a game changer in OT security. It's about dividing the network into smaller, isolated zones to limit the damage in case of a breach. Think of it like containing a fire within one room of a building.
So even if one part of the system is compromised, the segmentation prevents the attacker from spreading to other parts of the network and causing more widespread damage.
Exactly. And the NIST document provides a lot of detail about how to achieve effective network segmentation. They recommend things like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and something called demilitarized zones, or DMZs.
DMZs, that sounds intense.
They're basically buffer zones between different parts of the network, like a moat around a castle. Makes it much harder for an attacker to get to the most important systems.
Okay, that's a helpful visual. This is all starting to make sense now. But I have to admit, I'm a little intimidated by the complexity of securing these systems.
Yeah, it can be a lot. That's why NIST emphasizes the importance of having a dedicated OT cybersecurity program. It's not just about technical measures. It's about having the right policies, procedures, and people in place to manage risk effectively.
So it's not just about building the castle walls, it's also about having a well-trained army to defend it. But how do organizations even know where to start when it comes to managing all these risks?
Well, the NIST document provides a framework for risk management, which involves identifying assets, vulnerabilities, threats, and potential impacts. They even walk through a specific example of a risk assessment for a power plant, showing how to determine the overall security category of the system based on the potential impact of a breach.
This NIST document really seems like a goldmine of information. And honestly, the more we learn about OT security, the more it feels like a completely different world compared to traditional IT.
You're right, it is, and that's why NIST has developed what they call the OT overlay, which tailors traditional IT security controls specifically for OT environments. It takes into account the unique needs and constraints of OT systems, making sure that security measures don't accidentally cause disruptions or safety issues.
So instead of trying to force fit IT solutions into OT, they've created a more customized approach.
Exactly.
That's a release. Can you give us an example of how this OT overlay works in practice?
Sure. Let's take authentication requirements, for example. In IT, it's common to enforce strong passwords and multi-factor authentication across the board. However, in OT, there might be situations where an operator needs immediate access to a system in an emergency.
Right. You wouldn't want a complex login process to delay someone from shutting down a critical system during a potential meltdown.
Exactly. So the OT overlay provides guidance on how to tailor authentication mechanisms to meet both security and operational needs. It might recommend using multi-factor authentication for routine access, while having alternative procedures in place for emergency situations.
That makes sense. This tailored approach seems much more practical and less likely to cause accidental outages. It's like they've really thought of everything. We've covered a lot of ground already in this first part of our deep dive, but I'm eager to hear more about the specific challenges of securing hardware and software in OT environments.
Me too. We'll dive into those topics in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of OT cybersecurity.
Glad to be back. It's really interesting unpacking this NIST document with you.
Yeah, me too. So we've learned how different OT security is from traditional IT security and about the range of threats these systems face and the whole concept of defense in depth with its, multiple layers of protection.
Right. We talked about how important network segmentation is and the need for a dedicated OT cybersecurity program and how NIST created that OT overlay to tailor security controls for these environments.
Right. So now I want to learn more about securing the actual hardware and software that make up these critical systems. Let's start with the hardware. What are some of the key things to think about when protecting those physical components?
Well, it's not just about putting locks on doors and setting up security cameras, although those are definitely written elements. The NIST document highlights something called hardware integrity as a really important concept.
Hardware integrity. What does that mean exactly?
It means making sure that the hardware is functioning as intended and that it hasn't been tampered with or compromised in any way. Think about verifying the authenticity of components, protecting against counterfeit parts, monitoring for signs of physical damage.
So it's not enough to keep unauthorized people out. We also need to make sure that the equipment itself is genuine and hasn't been messed with, especially when we're talking about systems that control things like power grids and water treatment plants. You wouldn't want a counterfeit component to suddenly fail and cause a major outage, right?
Exactly. And another crucial aspect of hardware security is something called configuration management.
Configuration management. Okay, that sounds kind of techy. Can you break it down for us non-experts?
Sure. It's all about controlling the settings and parameters of the hardware to ensure that it's operating securely and reliably. Imagine a control panel with dozens of switches and dials. Each one needs to be carefully configured according to specific security guidelines.
So it's like having a detailed instruction manual for setting up and maintaining the hardware to make sure it's configured in the safest and most secure way possible.
It's a great way to think about it. And the NIST document really goes deep into configuration management. It provides guidance on developing and implementing secure baselines for OT devices and procedures for managing any changes to those configurations. It's all about minimizing the risk of human error or malicious tampering.
This is making me realize just how much attention to detail is required when it comes to securing these systems. It's not just about the big picture, it's about sweating the small stuff too.
Absolutely. And that same level of attention to detail applies to software security as well, which is like the other half of the equation.
Okay, so let's talk about software security. When I think about securing software, I think about things like antivirus software and firewalls. Are those relevant in the OT world as well?
They can be. But software security in OT often involves some unique considerations. Remember, we're talking about specialized software that controls critical infrastructure, like power plants and manufacturing lines. And these systems often have much longer life cycles than typical IT systems.
Right. I've heard that some OT systems are running on software that's decades old.
That's right. And that presents a major challenge because older software may not be compatible with modern security tools, or it might have known vulnerabilities that can't easily be patched.
So it's like trying to secure a vintage car with modern safety features. You can't just install airbags and anti-lock brakes in a car from the 1950s.
That's a great analogy. And the NIST document acknowledges this challenge, emphasizing the importance of managing legacy systems carefully and implementing what they call compensating controls to mitigate risks when traditional security measures aren't feasible.
Compensating controls, what are those?
They're basically security measures that address a vulnerability in a different way than the typical technical solution. For example, if it's impossible to patch a legacy system, a compensating control might involve isolating that system from the network, or implementing very strict access controls to limit who can interact with it.
So it's like finding creative ways to minimize risk, even when you're dealing with older systems that can't be easily updated.
Exactly. But while managing legacy systems is a major concern, the NIST document also emphasizes the importance of secure coding practices for new OT software development. It's about building security into the software from the ground up, rather than trying to bolt it on later.
Right, that makes sense. It's much easier to design a building with security in mind from the start than to try and add security features after it's already built.
Right. And the NIST document provides detailed guidance on secure coding practices and testing and validation techniques to ensure that new OT software is as secure and reliable as possible.
So it seems like the key takeaway here is that securing OT software is a multifaceted challenge. It requires a combination of managing legacy systems, implementing compensating controls where necessary, and building security into new software from the very beginning.
I think that's a great summary. It highlights the importance of taking a holistic approach to OT cybersecurity, considering all aspects of the system, from the physical hardware to the software that controls it.
We've talked a lot about the technical aspects of OT security, but I'm also curious about the human element. The NIST document mentions the importance of having dedicated personnel and processes in place. So what are some of the key roles and responsibilities when it comes to managing OT cybersecurity?
That's a great point. Technology is only part of the solution. You need skilled people to implement and manage these security measures effectively. The NIST document outlines several key roles, including security analysts, system administrators, and incident responders.
So it's like having a specialized team of experts, each with their own area of expertise, working together to keep these systems safe.
Exactly. And just like we talked about the need for specialized security controls for OT, the NIST document also emphasizes the importance of tailoring training and awareness programs for OT personnel.
Right. The threats and vulnerabilities in OT are different from those in IT, so the training needs to be tailored accordingly.
Right. OT personnel need to understand the unique risks associated with their environment and how their actions can impact the safety and reliability of these critical systems.
As we go deeper into this topic, I'm realizing that OT cybersecurity is not just about protecting technology. It's about protecting people and the essential services that we all rely on.
I couldn't agree more. It's about ensuring the safety, security, and well-being of our communities and our way of life.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation, and I think we've covered a lot of ground when it comes to understanding the complexities of securing hardware and software in these environments. But I'm curious to hear what else the NIST document has to offer.
Me too. There's still a lot more to explore, including specific security controls and best practices for mitigating various OT threats. We'll dive into those topics in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back, everyone. We're wrapping up our deep dive into the world of OT cybersecurity with the help of our expert guide and this super helpful NIST document.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. We've gone from, understanding what makes OT unique to the challenges of securing the hardware and software in these environments. So I'm really curious to learn more about the specific tactics and strategies that organizations can actually use to protect their OT systems. Like we've talked about the what's and the why of OT security, but what about the how?
Well, the NIST document goes into a lot of detail about that, talking about, all sorts of security controls and best practices that organizations can use to mitigate those OT threats.
Okay, cool. Let's start with something that feels relevant to everyday life. The document talks a lot about physical security, but I think when most people hear that, they think about things like fences and cameras and security guards. Is that all there is to it?
Well, those are definitely important, but physical security in OT goes a lot deeper than that. It's about controlling access to facilities, securing individual components, even managing environmental conditions. OT systems are often in harsh industrial environments where extreme temperatures or humidity or even dust can cause damage.
Oh, yeah. That's true. It's funny you mentioned that. I remember I toured a manufacturing plant once, and I was so struck by how much effort they put into like controlling the temperature and humidity in the control room. At the time, I thought it was just about like keeping the computers happy, but now I realize it was all part of this bigger security strategy.
Exactly. It's all about creating a safe and stable environment so those systems can operate reliably. And the NIST document goes into a lot of detail about specific physical security measures. Things like intrusion detection systems, video surveillance access control systems, even things like securing delivery and removal processes, you know, to prevent tampering or theft.
Wow. It sounds like they've really thought of everything and make you think about all the different ways that physical security could be compromised. From like someone sneaking into a facility to,
Love that.
a disgruntled employee tampering with a sensor.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's why the NIST document stresses the importance of a layered approach to physical security. Just like we talked about with network security, you want to have multiple lines of defense to make it as difficult as possible for attackers to get in.
Okay, so we're really starting to see how comprehensive OT security really needs to be. It's not just about, protecting data. It's about protecting the physical world as well. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something a little more technical. The document mentions something called boundary protection. What is that?
Boundary protection is basically about securing the perimeter of your OT network, you know, preventing unauthorized access from the outside world. Think of it like building a moat around your castle.
So keeping the bad guys out.
Yeah.
How do organizations actually do that? Like, what are some of the ways they can achieve effective boundary protection?
The list document recommends a combination of technical and procedural controls. So on the technical side, you've got things like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, secure remote access mechanisms. But it's also really important to have clear policies and procedures in place, like strong password requirements, access control, lists, regular security audits.
So it's kind of like having a strong lock on the door and making sure everyone remembers to actually lock it.
Yeah, exactly. And the NIST document goes into a lot more detail about all these different aspects of boundary protection. It gives you guidance on how to choose the right controls for your specific environment and your risk tolerance.
Okay, this is really fascinating, but let's move on to another really critical area, maintaining and managing these OT systems over time. What are some of the things we need to think about when it comes to keeping these systems secure over time?
That's a great question. Securing OT systems isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. The NIST document emphasizes things like patch management vulnerability assessments and incident response planning.
Okay, patch management, I hear that term all the time in IT. Is it the same for OT systems?
It's similar, but there are some important differences. In IT, it's generally a good idea to apply security patches as soon as possible. But in OT, it's not always that simple. These systems need to be incredibly stable and reliable. Applying a patch could disrupt operations or even introduce new vulnerabilities.
Right, it's like you wouldn't want to perform open heart surgery on someone while they're running a marathon.
Exactly. So the NIST document gives guidance on how to approach patch management in OT. It stresses the importance of testing patches thoroughly, like in a controlled environment, before you deploy them to the live systems.
So it's about finding that balance between keeping systems up to date and minimizing the risk of disruption. What about vulnerability assessments? What role do those play?
Vulnerability assessments are all about identifying weaknesses in your systems before attackers can exploit them. It's like getting a regular checkup at the doctor.
Oh, okay. To catch those problems early.
Exactly. The NIST document recommends doing vulnerability assessments regularly, using a combination of automated tools and manual reviews.
So proactively looking for weaknesses and addressing them before they become a real problem. What about incident response planning? Why is that so important for OT?
Incident response planning is about being prepared for the worst-case scenario, like a cyber attack or a security breach, like having a fire escape plan for your house.
Right. You hope you never have to use it.
Exactly. But it's essential to have one just in case.
Especially with OT systems, because if a critical system goes down, the consequences could be really, really bad.
Exactly. And the NIST document provides a framework for developing an OT incident response plan, including steps for detection, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. It's about having a clear process in place to minimize damage and get those systems back online as quickly and safely as possible.
Well, we've covered a ton of information in this deep dive. We've talked about physical security, boundary protection, patch management, vulnerability assessments, incident response planning. It seems like there's a lot to consider when it comes to protecting these OT systems. What are some of the key takeaways that our listeners should remember, even if they don't work directly in this field?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is that OT security is just different from IT security. These systems are closely connected to the physical world, and if they fail, there can be real-world consequences. It's not just about protecting data, it's about protecting people, and those essential services we all rely on.
Right. And securing these systems, it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process that requires technical expertise, organizational commitment, and a constant awareness of those evolving threats.
I agree. And I think the NIST document we've been talking about is a really valuable resource for anyone who wants to learn more.
Absolutely. Well, it's been great exploring this document with you. And for our listeners out there, think about this. If you could implement just one security measure to protect a critical infrastructure system that you rely on, what would it be and why? Until next time, stay curious and stay secure.